1798, the British Romantic poet William Wordsworth writes, along with Samuel Taylor Coleridge, lyrical ballads. The collection ends with this poem, lines written a few miles above Tintern Abbey, on revisiting the banks of the Wye during a tour, July 13th, 1798. 5 years have passed, 5 summers with the length of 5 long winters, and again I hear these waters rolling from their mountain springs with a sweet inland murmur. Once again do I behold these steep and lofty cliffs, which on a wild secluded scene impress thoughts of more deep seclusion and connect the landscape with the quiet of the sky. The day is come when I again repose here under this dark sycamore and view these plots of cottage ground, these orchard tufts, which at this season with their unripe fruit among the woods and copses lose themselves, nor with their green and simple hue disturb the wild green landscape. Once again I see these hedgerows, hardly hedgerows, little lines of sported wood, run wild, these pastoral farms green to the very door, and wreaths of smoke sent up in silence from among the trees with some uncertain notice, as might seem, of vagrant dwellers in their houseless woods, or of some hermit's cave, where by his fire the hermit sits alone. Though absent long, these forms of beauty have not been to me, as is a landscape to a blind man's eye, but oft in lonely rooms and mid the din of towns and cities, I have owed to them, in hours of weariness, sensations sweet, felt in the blood and felt along the heart, and passing even into my purer mind with tranquil restoration. Feelings, too, of unremembered pleasure, such perhaps as may have had no trivial influence on that best portion of a good man's life, on his little, nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and of love. Nor less I trust to them I may have owed another gift, of aspect more sublime, that blessed mood in which the burthen of the mystery, in which the heavy and weary weight of all this unintelligible world is lightened, that serene and blessed mood in which the affections gently lead us on, until the breath of this corporeal frame, and even the motions of our human blood, almost suspended, we are laid asleep in body and become a living soul, while with an eye made quiet by the power of harmony and the deep power of joy, we see into the life of things. If this be but a vain belief, yet oh how oft in darkness, and amid the many shapes of joyless daylight, when the fretful stir unprofitable and the fever of the world have hung upon the beatings of my heart, how oft in spirit have I turned to thee, O sylvan Wye, thou wanderer through the woods. How often has my spirit turned to thee. And now with gleams of half-extinguished thought, with many recognitions dim and faint, and somewhat of a sad perplexity, the picture of the mind revives again, while here I stand, not only with the sense of present pleasure, but with the pleasing thoughts that in this moment there is life and food for future years. And so I dare to hope, though changed no doubt from what I was when first I came among these hills, when like a roe I bounded o'er the mountains, by the sides of the deep rivers and the lonely streams, wherever nature led, more like a man flying from something that he dreads than one who sought the thing he loved. For nature then, the coarser pleasures of my boyish days, and their glad animal movements all gone by, to me was all in all. I cannot paint what then I was. The sounding cataract haunted me like a passion. The tall rock, the mountains, and the deep and gloomy wood, their colors and their forms were then to me an appetite, a feeling and a love that had no need of a remoter charm, by thought supplied or any interest unborrowed from the eye. That time is past, and all its aching joys are now no more, and all its dizzy raptures. Not for this faint eye, nor mourn, nor murmur. Other gifts have followed. For such loss, I would believe, abundant recompense. For I have learned to look on nature, not as in the hour of thoughtless youth, but hearing oftentimes the still, sad music of humanity, not harsh nor grating, though of ample power to chasten and subdue, and I have felt a presence that disturbs me with a joy of elevated thoughts, a sense sublime of something far more deeply interfused, whose dwelling is the light of setting suns, and the round ocean and the living air, in the blue sky, and in the mind of man a motion and a spirit that impels all thinking things, all objects of all thought, and rolls through all things. Therefore am I still a lover of the meadows and the woods and mountains, and of all that we behold from this green earth, of all the mighty world of eye and ear, both what they half create and what perceive, well pleased to recognize in nature, in the language of the sense, the anchor of my purest thoughts, the nurse, the guide, the guardian of my heart and soul, of all my moral being. Nor perchance, if I were not thus taught, should I the more suffer my genial spirits to decay, for thou art with me here upon the banks of this fair river, thou, my dearest friend, my dear, dear friend, and in thy voice I catch the language of my former heart, and read my former pleasures in the shooting lights of thy wild eyes. Oh, yet a little while may I behold in thee what I once was, my dear, dear sister. And this prayer I make, knowing that nature never did betray the heart that loved her. 'Tis her privilege, through all the years of this our life, to lead from joy to joy, for she can so inform the mind that is within us, so impress with quietness and beauty, and so feed with lofty thoughts, that neither evil tongues, rash judgments, nor the sneers of selfish men, nor greetings where no kindness is, nor all the dreary intercourse of daily life, shall ever prevail against us or disturb our cheerful faith, that all which we behold is full of blessings. Therefore let the moon shine on thee in thy solitary walk, and let the misty mountain winds be free to blow against thee, and in after years, when these wild ecstasies shall be matured into a sober pleasure, when thy mind shall be a mansion for all lovely forms, thy memory be as a dwelling place for all sweet sounds and harmonies, oh, then, if solitude or fear or pain or grief should be thy portion, with what healing thoughts of tender joy wilt thou remember me, and all these my exhortations. Nor perchance, if I should be where I no more can hear thy voice, nor catch from thy wild eyes these gleams of past existence, wilt thou then forget that on the banks of this delightful stream we stood together, and that I, so long a worshipper of nature, hither came, unwearied in that service. Rather say with warmer love, oh, with far deeper zeal of holier love, nor wilt thou then forget that after many wanderings, many years of absence, these steep woods and lofty cliffs, and this green pastoral landscape, were to me more dear, both for themselves and for thy sake. And so you have this whole long poem, so much going on there, but just to look at a few elements to really start to parse out some of what's going on, you have first the title, lines composed a few miles above Tintern Abbey on revisiting the banks of the Wye during a tour, July 13th, 1798. And so you have this long title, so much detail in there. Recently, the subject of a joke in the film, I'm thinking of ending things, that, the title goes on so long, and so it's trying to really set up this whole very specific, very detailed scene. And so you start to get into the first lines, and so you know from the title it's about a place, Tintern Abbey. It's also localized in the specific physical reference to it, where it's a few miles above. There's the specific occasion where he's revisiting the banks of the Wye, and there's the particular circumstances. So he's during a tour, and then you have it precisely dated as well. So you have the general scene of summer, but also you can sort of place exactly where it is, this sort of precise reference within the sort of poetic speaker's life. Then you get into the starting lines, and right from the start, we get the personal timeline. 5 years have passed, 5 summers with the length of 5 long winters. And so we're seeing the place at a slight physical remove, and then we also have this significant temporal remove between what he's seeing now and what he remembers from the past, and what he's sort of connecting this present scene in with, both in his mind and particularly in the poem. But the meaning is in how it impacts the speaker. The cliffs impress thoughts of more deep seclusion, and this style and this expectation is so influential that if today you took this natural scene and tried to parse out the personal details and just paint the images in poetic lines, we would still understand implicitly a system of valuation of such encounters that is about the interplay between the world and the mind, and you would need to take serious, difficult steps to impart some other clear purpose. Here it's not just the scene's impression, but its lasting impression. Amid towns and cities, his memory of this place has brought him sensation sweet, and, more deeply, tranquil restoration. It is something which lightens the weary weight of the unintelligible world, and in this way the philosopher and political economist John Stuart Mill credited Wordsworth in his 1873 autobiography with showing him that there was real permanent happiness in tranquil contemplation, and that the result that he was gradually but completely emerged from his habitual depression and never again subject to it. This is sort of just one prominent example of how in the sort of succeeding generation, Wordsworth poetry is this sort of very therapeutic work which gives this sense of this deeper pleasure. But as Wordsworth relates this, remember that he is also relating seeing the sights of this scene. The sights and sounds are things he takes in and cherishes, but he's also in part taken out of this scene and brought to contemplate wider philosophic ideas. So he's seeing the scene and remembering its past sense and imagining its future role, and he's also understanding that he himself has changed and will change, and ultimately also connects the value of the scene outward to his sister, who is there now seeing all of this and will, as he understands, have the long-term benefit of being able to draw on these present feelings. For the sense of Wordsworth himself changing, he recalls in the poem being present in this place in earlier years and the aching joys of those earlier moments, a pure sort of joy now lost, but suggests that for such loss I would believe abundant recompense, for now he is outside of thoughtless youth and all too aware of the still sad music of humanity, but despite all that, even enhanced by that, he finds deep value in this sort of experience, past instances of such, and what this will all mean for his sister, though she is not noted until the end. What he's learned in intervening years, which gives recompense for what is lost, is that the world is only half perceived by the eye and ear, and is then half created, which is not just to extol the value of the imagination, but is also a check on the imagination, re-emphasizing the need to anchor it in this way and giving a greater sense by which to cherish these moments and the possibility of future moments and sharing this with his sister who he loves. But then the culmination is now less anchoring in the scene as through his sister and seeing in her, just as he was recollecting while looking out on the landscape, his earlier feelings, and even if he should lose his capacity to hear nature, she should go on and remember all of this. But in that core relationship to nature, it's worthwhile that he is here revisiting the scene physically, but he was sustained for years without it in remote mental ways. And Mill was further soothed in part through Wordsworth poetry, though also the sort of tranquil recollection within himself, which the poetry then prompted. And so as an exercise in parsing out the Wordsworthian speaker, let's look at Taroko Gorge, a generative poem written by Nick Montfort in 2009, in an artist statement for the text inclusion in the Electronic Literature Collection Volume 3, Montfort writes, Taroko Gorge originated as a Python program that I had developed at Taroko Gorge National Park in Taiwan. If others could go to a place of natural beauty and write a poem about that place, why couldn't I write a poetry generator instead? Less esoteric than much of my other work and aimed at evocative description rather than provocation or parody, this generator forms strophes that begin and end with a path line and may have one or more static sight lines in between. Between each pair of such strophes is a cave line that trails off as if into darkness, like the tunnels in the park that were carved by Chiang Kai-shek's National Army. The generated text, which is produced limitlessly, is pleasing to read perhaps, but it seems at least as enjoyable to carve into the code and shape the program to represent different experiences and ideas. And so that's Nick Montfort's statement on the poem, and so the given structure through which the code organizes words taken from these variable lists form coherent lines, though much more vaguely suggestive of imagistic scenes than the clear through line of Wordsworth thought. As you mentioned with the cave lines, they trail off into these sort of darkened caves. The code outputs a boundless sequence of impressions one might plausibly have amid this scene. And of course, the styling, the language set up intentionally does give a particular sort of feeling, a particular sense of perception. And so here's one version of what the text of Taroko Gorge might read like, though each individual time that the page is opened, the text selects all of the variables anew, and so it'll effectively always be a new variation of the output. But here's one example. Mist roams the coves, brows roam the shapes, track the encompassing clear driven, height commands the rocks, stones dream, mist roams the ripplings, enter the sinuous arch clear, layers frame the rocks, heights exercise the ripplings, direct the objective cool driven, layers range the flows, monkeys exercise the rocks, direct the arched, layers roam the stone, stones dream, veins dwell, heights frame the stones, shade the encompassing cool clear, stone commands the rocks, shapes range the rock, direct the clear dim. And so one major shift here from Wordsworth is that where Wordsworth was directing his poem to his sister, there with him in that spot, Taroko Gorge runs these images through a machinic voice, which runs boundlessly, and so it's worth then considering how that dynamic promotes different sorts of expressions, where even though you're still inputting all of the individual words and the rules by which they're structured, you can still easily be pleasantly surprised by some of the outputs and combinations, which is different from being pleased to craft a good full line of poetry. But as Montfort noted in his author statement, it seems at least as enjoyable to carve into the code and shape the program to represent different experiences and ideas. And so what you have here actually is a given readily adaptable form. And so similar to the way you can feel out some sense of Tintern Abbey or Taroko Gorge remotely, so too can you input anything else and start exploring parallel ideas in similar ways. So for an example, I've rotated in some language from Wordsworth Tintern Abbey, and just as one brief possible example of what some of the output looks like, think back on Wordsworth's poem and then listen to this. Unremembered pleasures wander, tranquil restorations be, hedgerows view the long absences, repose the serene. Landscapes here the hardly hedgerows, smoke revives, landscapes here the hardly hedgerows, repose the unintelligible, serene, beautiful. Sky feels the tranquil restoration. Seclusions revive. Sky notices the hardly hedgerows. Supply the wild green, beautiful. Water views the tranquil restorations. Beauteous forms wander. Groves haunt. Copses feel the tranquil restoration. Impress the sublime serene. Orchard tufts hear the long absence. Long absences dare. Water beholds the unremembered pleasure. Impress the steep, beautiful, picturesque. Skies trust the unremembered pleasure. Tranquil restorations haunt. Murmurs trust the tranquil restoration. Repose the beholding green. And you could also always approach this in other ways as well, but it kept things like the sense of time passing, and so you have lines like, orchard tufts hear the long absence. And there's a bit of a learning curve to this, but it's really simple to make these sorts of shifts and take that poem you heard, just a minute ago, become the one you heard just now. And it may even seem too simple to some once you catch on to how it works, but consider how these very different forms give distinct visions of this natural scene, and think how you might adapt this form in your own ways, or even what you wish you could do differently. So in the description, I link a written guide I wrote of how anyone watching this could quickly and easily throw together something very easily with even fewer moving parts, and then you can try playing with Taroko Gorge or similar works, or if you think you have some idea of what you're doing already and are open to experimenting and seeing how things work and then adapting and readapting, you could start with something like this right now, sort of just edit a few things, see how it runs, edit more, until you sort of make whatever you want your sort of end version to be. But for those of you watching in the first couple of days, I'm hosting a live event on Tuesday evening, introducing this sort of writing to an even greater length, discussing some big ideas, brainstorming possibilities, creating a couple quick variations, and more, very sort of open social sort of event. Should be very exciting. Very excited for it myself. And so check out that in the description. And, if you're checking this out further on, or you just can't make it, Be sure to subscribe here, follow me on Twitter, or subscribe to my free newsletter. I plan to do many more cool things coming up over, the next few months, the next year, and so on. And so a lot of cool public stuff, more videos, and more blog posts, and so on. And so keep an eye out for all of that. There's all sorts of cool ideas around poetry and literature more broadly that I'm really excited to really sort of delve into more in the sort of coming months and stuff. So thanks for watching. I hope to, hear from you as well, through whatever medium. I'd like to, know your thoughts, know what sort of you're interested in learning about, and so on. And so, yeah, thanks for watching.